So with that, I'm going to turn things right over to Jen Pirtle from ETA to go ahead and kick things off. Jen?
Thanks, Brian. Just wanted to welcome you all back to our second chat on the IWR and WIPP project. We want to welcome Melissa and Muhammad from our pilot states who are going to be with us today. So feel free to ask all of your questions, and if we don't get to them today, we'll get them next time. Take it away, Rick.
Thank you, Jen. And thanks again for everybody for joining us today. Today's session, as you know, is about the IWR and WIPP technology tools and lessons learned from our pilot states. And we're joined by two pilots, New York and Mississippi. And we're going to try to get to allow you to dig in today. If you haven't already, indicate that you're on and where you're from. I know I saw Illinois on today. We're here in Jersey. We got folks from D.C. We got folks from Kansas, obviously Minnesota and New York. So we've kind of got the place surrounded, and that's as it should be. These chats, again to remind you, are really your opportunity to dig down informally with SMEs. We've got 45 minutes, actually a little less now, to get to the subject matter, so I'm going to dive right in. And I'm going to try to get us started by just a quick question from our program SMEs today with us. Some of you have been with our earlier sessions. You've heard from Tom Krasnarek at ITSE. You know, they were very involved in helping and supporting the pilot states. But today we're going to listen to Melissa, and we're going to listen to Mohammed, and we're going to pose our questions and open a dialogue for them. So I've got a question to start us off that I'm going to ask each of them to respond to really briefly. As you hear their responses, I'm sure it's going to bring up questions, and you may have some that you're bringing to the table. Would you go ahead, if you're a state participant, an implementer state participant, feel free to start asking your questions in the chat room facility. Just type them in there. Brian's going to log them over so that we can follow up with you on them. And at some point, we're a small enough group that we may just open up the phone lines and get into a verbal chat. So why don't I start, Melissa, with you and get New York State's perspective on the following question, and before we move over to Mohammed and get Mississippi's take on it. You know, this session, Melissa and Mohammed, is about lessons learned. And, you know, we have 45 minutes, and we probably could use 45 days for this topic. So, you know, I guess I can't ask you all the lessons learned because we don't have time. So my question is, if you would, what is the most painful lesson learned? I mean, where did you earn the biggest scar, and what can you tell us about it so that all of us that are following in your footsteps don't have to go through the same life lesson? What's the most painful lesson learned that you can save other people on this phone call from having to experience? Melissa, let me turn it to you.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. As I started jotting down my laundry list here, the biggest one I think would probably be just that everything moves very, very slowly. So be prepared for things to take a lot of time. And the other big thing is, you know, making sure you have the right people involved, having them be on board, and having them ready to make decisions. And what's happened a lot here is we've made decisions early on in the process, and then as we moved along, our perspective changed, or we learned new things, or we ran into limitations of our systems and had to revisit decisions over and over again. And I think that has hurt us quite a bit. So I don't know really how you can avoid that, but if you can, that would be one of the things to avoid. But yeah, just making sure you have the right people, have them have the power to make those decisions, knowing your system and knowing its limitations. And kind of, I guess, the point that I was just trying to make is as you start doing your business requirements, you think of all these really great ideas and you run into scope creep, and your IT folks will kill you for that. That really drags out the process a lot. So you have to be very clear about what it is that you're trying to accomplish and really limit it to that. And even though you have really great ideas and how to make it better, you kind of have to save those for a different phase, because otherwise you're not going to get any of it done. And I know I just kind of talked in circles, but hopefully you got something out of that.
Actually, I don't think you talked in circles at all. Okay. I think that's exactly the kind of recap that we were asking of from you, and I think that it's all very valuable, and we'll want to follow up. I'm going to go to Mohammed now, but one of the things I want to ask you is, you say make sure you have the right people on board. I'm going to follow up with you after Mohammed and ask you who the right people are.
Okay.
So you can get ready for that. And Mohammed, let me turn to you now. Thank you, Melissa. That was actually quite valuable. Mohammed, let me turn to you in Mississippi and ask you the same question. What are the most painful lessons you've learned in Mississippi?
Thank you, Rick. Here, in Mississippi, we had a couple of items, actually. One deals with more technology. Here, as we had talked earlier, we have two systems, one for the ES and one for the UI. We try to make sure we have a single user ID between these two systems, which were successful in implementing when we rolled out these two new systems. Later on, the plan was to have a single sign-on technology implemented between these two systems so that a user need not log into separate systems individually. So once it's logged into one, it's automatically logged into the other. So when we bring in IWR and the WIPP, we can seamlessly use the same single sign-on technology to switch between systems, and it'll all appear like a single system. Well, conceptually, it's true, but in order to accomplish that has been a very, very difficult task. We are using the open source called OpenAM. That's a recommended product. IWR uses OpenAM. It's a good product, but we have a lot of technical difficulties trying to work in our environment. We are still working on it. It has taken us a long time to get there, but we are pretty confident now. We learned a lot of lessons in implementing it, especially with the different platforms and different flavors of the OpenAM and what features it offers and whether it's compliant with your in-house systems. And that's very critical for you to know up front, what kind of single sign-on technology you're going to use. Since IWR uses OpenAM, how does it fit in your organization? You need to evaluate that upfront and make plans well ahead of time. We started the OpenAM discussion early March this year, and we thought it's a 2-month, 3-month project, and we'll be done in June or July. But this December, we still are working on it. End of December is our plan to start testing, and then we are going to go live in February. But that's a long, long time for us, to be working on something. In addition, OpenAM, even though it's an open source product, it does not have a good support system. In order to secure support, we have to go through a company called ForgeRock, who is supporting OpenAM, and ITSC is in conversation with OpenAM to provide sort of a national level support. So we have issues, we can call them. Currently, we do not have a contact with them, so they can't help us. So we are only looking at open source community, basically free help, which is not really as helpful when you are dealing with production issues. But we have some good technicians here, so we are working our way through. So Mississippi will be gladly help other states if they encounter any issues until we have a paid contract with somebody to help these issues. That's very important lesson we learned, during our process. Similarly, on the functional side, we do have one more process. I think Melissa covered some of it. Yes, the decisions, they take a long, long time. How does your IWR look like, and how does your WIPP look like? Whether we should use the ones developed by ITSC or should we do some of it in-house. That's a lot of unknowns here. You know your systems well enough. You know what IWR and the WIPP brings to the table because they're already developed, so that you're not going to waste time on deciding how they're going to look like. You know how they're going to look like. It's just deciding how you're going to incorporate in your environment. So that hard lifting has been done, for the other states. The third thing I have is, again, functional, which deals with the navigation itself. We talked about single sign-on, we talk about IWR, we talk about the WIPP. We also need to keep in mind the state systems, how many systems you have behind the scenes and how well are they integrated. UI, Wagner Pfizer, WIA, how do you anticipate taking all this information and populating into your multiple systems? And how are you going to actually complete the full ES registration? How are you going to complete the full UI application? And how are you going to complete everything else the applicant is supposed to be doing in order to be receiving services? So the whole navigation from start to end is very, very critical for the business users to understand, and also for the technical people to see how it's going to flow so that you can program correctly. Again, it goes back to requirements. At the same time, you need to control scope creep. As I said earlier, you know your systems the most. So you need to understand how these things would fit in, what's the feasibility, what should come first, what should come second. Very, very critical for you to know up front so that you have a very, very clear vision. So you don't really get lost and get trapped into technical and non-technical issues. So I think that's pretty much sums up Mississippi's lessons learned. Of course, we have a few more, but as questions are asked, we can cover them.
Well, thanks, Mohammed. And I think that I'm hearing you and Melissa kind of using different language to talk about some related questions. I mean, she's talked about watch out for scope creep and things move slowly and they take time, which might be a different way of saying what you said, which was get a very clear vision about what it is you're trying to do and stick to it, and don't let yourself get be mindful and realistic about what you're going to achieve and go out and do it. And I want to follow up on those lessons with both of you following this opening segment here. But Tom Krasnarek, we have a special surprise guest tonight. Tom Krasnarek did join us. It was hung up on a different call and got to us. Tom, thanks for joining. And,
no problem.
I want to invite you into this conversation before we open it up to states. You've had the occasion now working from the ITSE side, and I know, you're not a state, and therefore you're not implementing it in a state or local area, but you've kind of had to watch other states do it and help prepare them, and you've been at this from conception to now the creation of products. So what kind of lessons learned from your observation of working both with New York and Mississippi and probably with others would you think can be important to share with the group?
Well, something that I've heard maybe once or twice, not only from USDOL, but with everybody, is that this is more than just an IT project. And, even though we're implementing certain pieces of technology, there's going to be an impact to the existing business processes within any state. So I think Mohammed summed it up well when he was saying, you really have to understand how it's going to impact the business processes within each state, not just the IT systems. Today, the technologies for these systems can basically handle any of the rules or any of the processes that you guys want to throw at it, but it's really how do you want to implement it for your state? So when we're talking about the IWR, what systems is it really going to touch? What's going to be replaced? What's not going to be replaced? The goal is basically not to replace any system or determine eligibility, but really just to capture the information and to help populate it across all these systems. The same with the IWR. We talk about the 4 transformational elements, and we have little bits and pieces of all of these, scattered within the IWR, but there's also a huge role to play within the WIPP itself on how it handles and deals with the job seeker coming in through that front door. There's ways that we can actually populate information back to the job seeker so it can reduce calls. Understanding how to do that and pushing that information up front might allow for less call volumes to each of the states. So really coming up with a clear vision and goal of how you want to actually tackle the entire project, not necessarily looking at it from a technology standpoint, but understanding the business processes that you want to improve and enhance. within each of the states. So basically, I think the biggest goal is really having a clear vision and goals for each state moving forward and understanding the business processes that will be impacted based on the technology enhancements that are being put in.
Tom, thank you for that. And, I don't know if all the folks on the phone understand that. They heard me griping and chiming at them the other day about the issue of vision, and they'll probably hear it a few thousand times more from me. But I think what I just heard from you guys, and Tom, you captured it, but I think it was alluded to both by Melissa and Mohammed, is, this doesn't start with, oh, my IT guys need to get in a room and figure out what to do with IWR and WIPP. It really starts with a vision for how you want to integrate service delivery in your state to the benefit of a customer. And by defining what you want the customer to be able to do, then the IT guys can figure out how to make the WIPP and the IWR and other tools work to that. Am I making sense? Do I get it, Tom?
Yes, definitely. There's flexibility built into each part of this system. So if you're looking to have an easier sign-on process, then you might want to implement a single sign-on process across the board, allowing for folks, job seekers, to actually access services a lot faster. The same thing on the WIPP. Every piece that is inside that WIPP is modular. You can control the amount of data and information that's actually populated within each of those modules. So although there's technologies, pieces behind it that handles the population of that data, it's really understanding what the call volumes are, or what the majority of the questions are that you actually receive, so that you can provide the right information, not just going through and just throwing information that you think the job seeker may be looking for. And I think all of that comes into play by basically properly going through and planning for an implementation of these tool sets.
Awesome. I don't know, and by the way, I'm going to come around to each state. Brian, if you could prepare us to open the lines. There are not that many dial-ins here. This is a small group, intimate group, if you will. And so I'm going to come around, and I think I'm going to start with Kansas, so you guys get ready. And just open the lines and ask Kansas first, what are you thinking?
The conference is now in talk mode.
But in the meantime, and before I do, Jen Pirtle, ETA, has invested a lot of time and money and effort, beginning with the formation of the federal and state cross-functional work group that conceptualized all this stuff, and continuing through all the pilots and funding the development of these technology tools. I want you to chime in just for a minute about, so you put these tools out there. We've got a lot of states now that their whistles are wet and they're still trying to conceive what to do with this and how to do it. What's ETA's longer range plan here, and how do these tools fit into what you guys are trying to achieve?
Thanks, Rick. Yeah, I think the ultimate goal of this project and everything that we have regarding all of our reemployment projects is basically to get it more integrated service delivery. How we do that through some of these tools that we have developed. We have it through the business processes, through training staff, through just getting the message out there. So, developing these tools is kind of phase one of our grand plan, I guess you could say. So we have our pilot states that have developed these tools, and now we're trying to implement these tools. You guys are here to be kind of the next round of innovation to build upon these tools and implement them as well. But we have another project that's coming up that I want to tell you about so that you can have it on your minds while you're planning this week. And that is, we've put some money into a contract to have contractors go out to up to 20 states to help them with their integration integrated service delivery, and it's to help people identify where their gaps are in integration, and whether if their gaps have to do with IT and some of these tools would help, then that would be a recommendation that we would give to the states later. This is kind of a one-time opportunity where we have some funding for contractors to come out to these states. Because you are already shown interest and want to make these changes, we've already kind of put you guys on the short list to receive that kind of additional help. So if you're interested, I'd like to know about it so that we can move forward with trying to get you connected to our contractor and build that into your strategic plan so that you can utilize that service. But basically what it is contractors will come out and they will look at your business processes, they will look at your integration policies and see how you're integrated, and they'll look and see that they match up. Your vision for integration and how you're actually doing it, are those matching up, and we'll offer you some areas for improvement and recommendations. So I just wanted to tell you that was out there because that kind of builds on Tom's point that this is about integration, not just these tools.
I appreciate that, Jen. I think that it's getting to be clear that, we in the earlier session today, we heard one of the SMEs from Minnesota on social media mention that increasingly business is asking them to do more with a single point where they can get labor market information and demand and talent communities online. And I think what essentially is being said here is that, service integration now is about improving our efficiency, but more so it's about making sure that we stay at the front end of what is happening in talent development, what businesses are starting to expect and anticipate from us, and that we're in a position to deliver it for both business and job seekers. So, this is beyond the life of this grant, obviously, that there is an ongoing need to drive this. So I want to turn back to the state. Thank you for that, Jen. I want to turn back to the states now. I'm going to start with Kansas. I think you guys are there, and your phone lines should be open. What is impacting you here about lessons learned, and what questions do you have for these SMEs?
This is Mike from Kansas.
Mike.
Can you hear? Well, first of all, I'll never pass up some money, so put Kansas on the short list for consultant help. And really, I think one of our historical issues or hurdles have been as soon as we start the conversation, we immediately jump to being down in the weeds and thinking about the two specific systems that we want to talk to each other instead of staying on that treetop level and looking at the big picture and what do we want our customers to experience and staying away from immediately putting up all the barriers of why it won't work, but instead focusing on how it could work.
Yeah, I know, and let me pick up on that. Mohammed, I'm going to ask you to do it. I know from conversations, I don't know whether I've had with you or others, but in Mississippi, I was really impressed, I think, if I'm remembering right, that kind of almost one of your first steps after kind of getting the team together was to call on a work group of local case managers, right, and bring them into a room with your IT guys and say, okay, what is it exactly that you want your customers to be able to do online? I mean, I don't know that you mentioned even SSO or OpenAM or WIPP or any of these terms that we now are throwing around here, as much as you said, take me through the customer experience. What does a customer do with you in person, and what would you like them to be able to do online? Didn't you do a process something like that, or did I dream it?
No, yes, we did actually, Rick. You're right. We brought in all the key players, from our different local offices. So we had a room full of probably 20, 25 people who used to do this kind of work on a daily basis. And we wanted to actually use that opportunity to understand more about our modernized system. So we had just rolled out in 2009 a new ES system, and then people have been using it. Of course, it was a very drastic shift from a mainframe green screen to a web-based system for the ES people. They had no idea how the services can be transformed, especially with the self-service option. So it was new, and we had still some users struggling on how to use the new system. They just couldn't comprehend, and we had a lot of learning curve going around with different sets of people at different levels. So we wanted to use an opportunity to get all of them together in a room and let them talk to tell us, what do you see in this current system that's problem? How does the job search work now versus how should it be working rather? We want to improve the job search. We want to do the skills transferability. We want to do some kind of gap analysis, and we want to do improve the services where the self-service claimant applicant can do more on their own before contacting us. So it was a very, very fruitful exercise. We had them talking. We had our IT people, our contractors, taking notes, and we created, several-page document identifying how we can improve our system. And then we looked at the national vision, and we tried to marry them up. And, the surprise was they are not really far off. What the national vision intended is pretty much in line with what our people, wanted to see in a new system or in an improved system, rather. And we actually even sowed the seeds a long time ago, even before 2009, we started looking at ways to integrate our ES and UI systems. So we pretty much used most of the SBR opportunity in the past. We wrote several grants, to integrate ES and UI with that additional money received. And so we were trudging along, making lots of progress. But this national vision, came as the surprise packet, with a lot of money in it, which can help us do what we have always wanted to do. So this is a great opportunity, for Mississippi and our clientele here, to implement this national vision and make things much better for our customers.
Mohammed, I appreciate that, because I think some of the folks that are with us today, and some of the folks that are on our teams at the beginning, we're prototypes, and a lot of us get overwhelmed by the technology terminology and think, well, this is good, but I need to get IT in the room. And you do. But it's interesting to me that, one of the first steps is not necessarily asking IT to put a pencil or a keystroke to a computer. It's more about getting the business folks to define what it is you want, which is, going back to Tom Krasnerik's point, what is your vision? Is it an SSO so that somebody only has to remember a password? Or do you want to do like Mississippi's doing and get to a point where you've got LMI and you've got the green or yellow or red human character online to give people a sense of their gap on reemployment, or integrating job zone like New York? What is your vision? And that starts really with a business process analysis, not with IT doing anything per se. So I thought that was very important to make note of. So thanks for the story, Mohammed. And let me turn to Georgia now. And I guess Damon or whomever, I don't know who's going to be the spokesperson down there, but Georgia, I know you mentioned to me on an earlier call today, you've had a lot of dot points you're connecting down there in terms of multiple IT initiatives in Georgia. And now you got a little bit more insight to these tools. What questions do you have for our SMEs, if any, today?
Too many in this time period.
I know, so just go fast.
No, I mean, your last comment, I think that we have gone through our business process of developing what it is that we want both our job seeker, our workforce professionals, and our employer customers to be able to see, access, and do. This is kind of one of those feast or famine kinds of things. We had been working on some code that we graciously got from the state of Texas, and we're in the midst of adapting that code to our needs. And then we purchased Burning Glass. And Burning Glass does many things that code doesn't do, and some things that it didn't. And we're in the midst of really just sifting through that just within the past 3 or 4 weeks when this opportunity arose. So now basically we have 3 brand new front doors, and we're just trying to see how do we consolidate those 3 front doors into one super front door.
Yep.
We've kind of gone backwards in that. Up until about a year ago, we had ES, UI, and WIA all integrated. And just recently, WIA has moved on to another state agency. So we still have ES and UI integrated. And we're trying to reconnect with our brethren where WIA now resides. But really, this has been very helpful. We're just trying to look at how to, again, look at those 3 front doors and how to best utilize those to meet our business plan.
Yeah, Georgia, and I hear you. And you guys, the other day I was on a call, and somebody from Kentucky said, we've gone from 0 to 100 miles per hour in the last 3 days. I sense from what's happening that something similar to that is starting to percolate in Georgia. I mean, you've connected a lot of dots, and there's a lot of information coming at you. So I think your original comment is right. It's probably too much for 45 minutes, but by exposing you, we create the opportunity for more questions. And before we close today, I'll make sure that we have a way of connecting you guys to continuing to ask these questions and for us to share, because there's going to be a need for that beyond the 13th of December. We know that, and we're starting to give some thoughts to it. Thanks, Georgia. Illinois, I wanted to get over to you guys and see whether what you've heard today is resonating for you, and what other questions you may have prompted in your minds.
Well, hey, Gideon's on. I didn't want to overstep if Kathy wanted to mention something, though.
No, let's go ahead. That's okay, Matthew. Go ahead.
Hey, so, I think the thing that resonates with me the most, and I'm a business user, which in our organization, that kind of means service delivery. I'm not from our Information Services Bureau, and we're currently going through each of our technology systems and the business users, and basically prioritizing projects for next year. I think just this seems like a no-brainer at the 40,000-foot level. Yeah. So I guess I have 2 questions. If there's suggestions for how do I get this to be front and center priority, what's the best way to build sort of internal coalition that maybe you guys have learned? And then the second piece is there's a lot of good connectivity going on with Common Front Door around UI and ES. I'm curious if where people are at in terms of integrating WIA. So that's kind of my thoughts.
Well, let's start with the first one first, Mark. And I think this probably everybody can chime in, but I want to start with Melissa on this. Melissa, you made the comment early on, getting the right people on board was kind of like your first lesson learned. And it's not exactly the same question as was just asked, but I guess to get the right people on board, you have to deal with the issue of how do I get it to be front and center and a priority. So can you speak to that question from Illinois?
Sure. I think as I mentioned in the webinar last week, we were pretty fortunate here in New York that on the ES side and the WIA side, we're one division here in New York. Our deputy commissioner was part of the initial project that came up with the vision, really pushed for our state to apply for this grant opportunity. So we already had that as a priority for the ES and WIA side, and it was a matter of bringing our UI counterparts to the table and convincing them. So there were, a series of meetings to kind of make that happen, and they saw the benefits of it and were on board. And then you needed to bring the IT folks to the table. For us, because we were both part of the national project and actually creating and building these tools at the same time as we're trying to implement them here in the state, it was kind of like running 2 projects at once. And so not all of the IT people that should have been part of the project from the start were, and I think that has kind of hurt us and put us behind the 8 ball. So while you definitely need business there, and other than, it's obvious that that this needs to be done and is the right way to go. I don't really know how you can go about making it a priority or convincing people to be on board. But and in addition to the UI people, you need to make sure you have your councils, your legal people there, your the local Workforce Investment Act people. We invited a few of our WIPP directors to join in the initial meetings. Your communications people and the people who will ultimately be responsible for marketing this whole effort. Your equal opportunity people, they played a big role in how we're asking some of the questions we're going to ask, and councils and communications also played a big role in our verbiage, the work group that we call it. So you want to make sure those people are there. And then on the IT side, you again need council's office to review all the different contracts and MOUs and SLAs and all these other acronyms that are out there. And you need your internal security office definitely there, architecture, and then the people that are intimate with each of the systems. But through it all, and even on the IT side, you definitely always want to have your program people, your employment services and WIA, your UI, and your IT people, because they're the ones who have that vision, know that vision, and can make sure that the project is staying on track.
Awesome. Tom, Mohammed, anybody else want to chime in?
Well, the one thing I will say, I'm sorry, Mohammed, didn't mean to step on you on that one. Both New York and Mississippi has very strong leadership, and I think in any of these types of projects, I think the buy-in starts at, from the top down. I think they both understood the benefits of going in this direction, and they echoed that to their own staff. At the staff level, one of the big things there is getting people involved early in the project so that they're part of it and they can have their own ownership when implementing these different tools, which I think that alone creates a huge buy-in for any group, allowing them to have their own personal ownership and also their, blood, sweat, and tears involved in any of these projects will allow for them to actually make it, create more of a buy-in internally, and they'll also sell the tools as well. So they become advocates of anything that they help build and help be part of. So I think that's some of the things that I've seen, and I think that we try to practice with building out these tools by getting everybody involved early on in the project.
Tom, thanks. I have some follow-up thoughts on that too, but I want to go to Mohammed to see if you have anything to add.
Rick, actually, Melissa and Tom covered everything. I just have one thing to add to that, which is, we need to have a single project manager, because this national vision touches UI, ES, Wagner 5, and WI, all of those areas. You still need a single person to manage and to handle all the stakeholders involved, including IT. Preferably, you would want the project manager to be a bigger business side person, who can speak on business than IT, and then give instructions to IT to get the work done. So it's very critical to have a single point of contact for all management and execution of the project, so that you don't have finger pointing, you don't have somebody else was supposed to do that kind of assumptions. So it's very critical when you form the team to have the hierarchy, the structure in place, so that the project manager, or whatever you want to call it, has the sole responsibility of making this a success.
I think that's wonderful advice as well. And just let me, if I could, we're going to speak at tomorrow's general session a little bit about the requirement in your grant for a communications plan. And let me say that, you've heard from the SMEs today about the fact that this takes time, that it begins with a vision that has to be really carefully thought out based on what you think you can achieve and what you need to achieve in your state. So you'll hear more about all this a little bit, and we'll talk a little bit more tomorrow. But in terms of the question from Illinois, which I think is like a central question, it's kind of like the 800-pound gorilla in the room. How do we get this to be a front and center priority? I will tell you that in every change initiative I've ever been involved with, and unfortunately due to my advancing age, there's been several of them now, and they've been big ones. Every one of them shares some certain characteristics, and I can tell you this one will be no different. And that the first and foremost is leadership and high-end process ownership. In New York was mentioned, Karen was involved in the original state work group. So she left with a passion as an owner, not as somebody who was told by ETA to do something, as an owner of this vision, and she went back and shook the tree in New York and advanced that because she felt it at a level of passion. And when you look at your grant and the formulation of your teams, that top-level process owner from each of the affected agencies has to be engaged at an emotional level. And I sometimes get accused of waving the flag on things like this, but I personally believe these initiatives are as transformational as any I've seen in 20 years. I mean, they have the power of potentially really changing our format for service delivery, really enabling us to move a lot of people that are able to self-service, and therefore allow our resources in local offices to really engage with the people that need face-to-face services the most, that have the greatest barriers. They have the potential to really enhance the way we deliver labor market information and talent information to employers. They can be transformational. They can make this system more efficient, more effective, and make us really the talent pipeline that we all hope to be. And those are messages that resonate with governors today and resonate, therefore, with cabinet level officials and with administrators. So I really think that that I would start with that understanding, is that the communications plan is your opportunity. You don't have to have the answers today, but you know now that you're going to have to find the right messaging to really engage these leaders at a high level. And ultimately, Illinois, that's where the buy-in starts to come from, when it becomes their idea and it becomes an initiative that is being driven from the top down. And that's when resistance starts to melt away, at least in my experience. So, this is big stuff, as Wendy from ETA would say. And it requires time and thought, but it also requires high-level process ownership and engagement. And I would encourage you to consider whether your communications plan isn't your opportunity to really think about how you're going to craft the messaging and share the results of what you all are now getting your eyes on, like the results of what New York and Mississippi have achieved with these tools, to be able to share that knowledge and get other people as excited about the prospects as you are. So we are now 3 minutes long, and I think Georgia said it best. We could have used another 45 minutes today, but in some ways, this needs some bite-sized chunks. So here's what I'm going to promise you. If you will continue to vet your questions here through the main chat room, we will make sure that we get answers and that we post answers on the Ask the Expert or otherwise get them out to you. And we'll also make sure that these questions follow us into follow-up sessions like tomorrow's and future chats. So go ahead, please. Continue to ask your questions in the main chat. Remember, if there's anything that you have that we didn't get to today that you can enter in that chat room or email to us, we'll make sure to get those answers to our questions to the SMEs and then back to you guys going forward. So I want to thank our subject matter experts for the day. Appreciate all of what you guys always do in making yourselves available to these things. This is a big topic that requires a lot of exchange of information to get people engaged. So today is just another attempt to start to share that knowledge, and there'll be more to come. Again, thank you all for taking the time, and for you and as attendees, feel free to please give us your feedback on today in the poll that Brian brought in. And don't remember, email us or otherwise get us any remaining questions you have. We'll make sure that we filter those questions through our SMEs and get them back to you. Meanwhile, we'll be looking forward to seeing you again on tomorrow's general session. Everybody have a wonderful day, and thanks again for your time and your ongoing commitment to the process. Appreciate it very much. Have a great day, all.